Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Shall we start?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, Russell. I'm really happy that we can have this conversation. As I was saying earlier, I don't know as much on compassion-focused therapy, so it feels like I have a chance to meet an expert. So thank you for meeting me today and having.
Oh, you're welcome. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Let me introduce you for the people that are listening. Dr. Russell Kolts is a professor of psychology at the Eastern Washington University. He has authored and co-authored numerous books and articles, including brilliant names or brilliant titles like The Compassionate Mind Guide to Managing Your Anger, An Open-Hearted Life, Transformative Lessons for Compassionate Living from a Clinical Psychologist, and a Buddhist Nun, which I really want to read. CFT Made Simple, and Experiencing Compassion-Focused Therapy from the Inside Out. Russell Kolts is an international expert on compassion-focused therapy. He has pioneered the application of CFT to the treatment of problematic anger. He often conducts trainings and workshops on compassion and CFT. And very interesting to listen to, he has also appeared in a TEDx talk entitled Anger, Compassion, and What It Means to Be Strong. Yes, that's what I definitely wanted to know more about anger and compassion. I was thinking, reading through the things that I saw from you and listening to some podcasts that you've done before, I felt like, yes, of course, I know anger is probably a way to not touch upon other vulnerable emotions that I have. And I gather that. And at the same time, when I'm angry, don't take my anger away from me. Because really, being compassionate in that moment, I don't think so, because I'm right, or something like that. So I guess that's my main, I guess that's everyone's question. Why can I not be angry?
Well, anger is an interesting emotion in that, what we know about it seems to indicate that it can function as either a primary or a secondary emotion.
Okay.
So what you said earlier, that I'm sort of aware that I sometimes use anger maybe to cover up more vulnerable feeling emotions, but don't take it away from me. And that's accurate. Sometimes many of us will use anger as a way to sort of avoid, sadness or anxiety or things like this. But that's not always the function of anger. Sometimes anger is a primary emotion. Sometimes that is the response. You see injustice or you see something like this. And of course, maybe there's some heartache or some other stuff in there too, but the anger is a primary response to seeing. And so, the last thing I would ever want to do is to lead people to believe that anger is somehow bad or not okay or something to be, got rid of. I think it's more about relating to anger in sort of a functionally helpful way. Compassion really begins with looking into whatever the struggle or suffering is and trying to understand it so we can work with it skillfully. And, when we look at anger, particularly through the lens of evolution, when people say fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, anger is kind of the fight part of that. Really, it evolved to help us defend ourselves from threat. And it's very good in certain contexts at doing that. The tricky bit is most of us, during most times in modern life, responding to the threats I face in my everyday life, for example, with anger tends to cause problems in my life. Most of those problems are not solved in that way. So let's say, I'm kind of angry right now, actually. We had another hate crime in the United States this week where several Asian American Pacific Islander businesses were targeted in Atlanta, and people were shot and killed, and it was terrible. And I can get really angry about that. And I do get really angry about that.
That's horrific. Yeah.
But if I look at the way anger functions, I like to say anger is a wonderful sign and a terrible strategy for most of the challenges I face. It's a very good sign or signal. It's very good at highlighting for me the things that are important to me, the transgressions, the things that I want to try and do something about. But I find if I try to solve those problems by acting out my anger, it tends to create more problems, right? So let's say I'm talking with somebody about, some aspect of that hate crime, or the way that certain politicians in the States have referred to the COVID-19 virus in sort of a racist way, right? Which I'm not even going to repeat because I don't want to repeat that.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's say somebody says that they refer to the virus in this racist way. That would anger me. That would bring up some anger in me because I see the hurt that's playing out in the lives of real people as a result of that framing of the pandemic. And so it'd be very easy for me to come at that person. Well, how can you say that? I mean, don't you see how racist that is? Don't you see the harm that's causing? Even like that, that's just a little bit of anger. That's just the smallest bit. I mean, I have anger. That's the smallest bit of me articulating my anger. But the problem is if I come straight at that person in a way that's sort of fueled by and the manner of communication really is one of anger, is that going to shift their view? Is that going to invite them to consider maybe what's problematic about what they're saying? No, actually, what we know is that it's very likely to trigger threat in them.
Yeah.
That threat is anger or anxiety or whatever. But when people feel threatened, they don't change. They go into self-defense mode and actually tend to dig in further into their pre-existing view. And the other who's challenging that view becomes the enemy that I have to defend myself and perhaps even this view that I'm holding against.
I have a side note on that, if I may. The thing
Please, yes.
that like comes up for me is that acting upon anger exactly makes somebody else do the same thing and also go into a fight mode. But what I'm thinking now is if we're talking about fight, flight, freeze, fawning, that if I, for example, I for a long time, it's getting better now, but for a long time for me, I had the response to go above, like really get angry, or to go down and make myself small. And with some people, the same thing happens. Like if you're not truly genuinely contacting someone and you're making yourself smaller, then the same thing happens. People go into a threat response and get angry as well. Absolutely.
So there's a lot of trickiness to this. And I think that, coming at this issue, the issue of anger and how these interactions play out from a standpoint of compassion really is about just sort of, for me, I think kind curiosity is sort of the secret sauce in all of this, and to come at it and go, okay, let's see if we can understand how this works. And like functionally, how is anger helpful and how does it, function to help me to be better able to address the things that are really important in my life? And also, how can it potentially get in the way? And at that point, it becomes less about the anger than about what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, right? And if the goal I have here is to try and get this person to sort of reflect on potentially the harm from them repeating this sort of racist framing about the virus, coming at them with anger is probably not the way to do it. On the other hand, if I can appeal to their compassion, if I sort of assume that there's a good person in there, all this stuff on the surface, that very likely most people who say that if they understood that, that doesn't harm, some government out there somewhere or some scientist or whatever whatever the idea is, it harms like vulnerable Asian American people in our country who just want, like everybody else, to be happy and have their lives. And I think probably, this hate crime shows that this isn't true for everybody, because I'm not going to get into that right now necessarily. But I think most people would say, I don't want to hurt those people. I don't want to do that. And so I find if we can connect with people in a way that appeals to what in CFT we would understand as this sort of basic caregiving motive that we all have, because it evolved within us. That's why we survived once mammals started having helpless young. We had to evolve that. And if we can appeal to that and bring that online for people, I think it can be very helpful. But the problem is the best way to shut that part of us down is to spike threat. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to connect with that kind of nurturing motive when we're feeling threatened, because everything in our brains is really priming us to defend ourselves.
I think that the wording that you're using already, you probably saw my head go down because I was writing some stuff down, because the wording that you're using for this helps me to go into a compassionate mode quite immediately. When I get angry at someone and I want to be compassionate, I often try and think of what would be the most compassionate explanation why this person does what he does. But when I do that, I keep getting angry because I feel like I don't care what the compassionate explanation is. He hurt me or she hurt me. And this is...
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is saying like, how can I be better at handling this situation for myself? And I know that I don't know this at the moment, and let me try and figure that out, because I'm not apparently very good at dealing with this kind of situations. And the other person I know usually is a good person, is away from the content of the whole discussion that is going on, and helps me connect better immediately.
Yeah, I was thinking about this kind of thing a lot because I was teaching this diversity in counseling class this quarter. And one of the students, I had the students do presentations, and they were just wonderful. And one of the students found this quote, and I wish I could, credit the original person who said it, but I just heard it through the student. But it was so powerful, it hit me, and I'd never heard, I thought like this before, but I never heard it said quite this way. And the quote was, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference?
Ooh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I heard that, it just landed. It's like, whoa. And it actually brought up some real sadness in me, because so many times in my own life, if you ask me that question, I wanted to make a difference.
Yeah.
But I went about it like I was making
a point. Yeah.
And in such a way that it actually almost made it impossible for me to make a difference.
Yeah.
Because it put the other person in threat. And when you look, in CFT, we have this, Paul Gilbert developed this 3 systems model of emotion, which is sort of a heuristic for looking at emotions through the lens of evolution and how they organize us in the service of various evolutionary goals, like defending ourselves from threat and pursuing goals, things like this. And what we see again and again is, if you see two people, if you see conflict with human beings, probably human animals as well, anytime humans are not getting along or having problems, and this could be individuals or, it could be nations, things like this. Very often what's going on is you've got 2 threat systems just bouncing off of each other. Mm-hmm. You've got one person, a group or nation feeling threatened. And so they interact with the other in a way that produces an experience of threat. Okay. So they come right back at it, and it just bounces back and forth. Now, occasionally we have, this is all complicated by legitimate bad actors, people who have, harmful motivation or an exploitative motivation, willfully so. But I think that's actually not true for most cases of human conflict. Mm-hmm. I think very often it's It's just we're interacting in a way that triggers threat in the other person.
Yeah.
And so bounce off of one another, threat, until one or the other says, "Oh, to heck with it," and just wanders off. The other thought that I had when you were talking, a lot of times people ask me, what can I do when I'm really angry? You were kind of getting at it. When I'm in anger, I try to think about it like this, and the angry version of me just doesn't care.
Yeah, doesn't let go.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't. And she won't, because anger organizes us in a way that is just absolutely grounded in certainty. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of self-justifying and perpetuating. And if we think about it again, if it's the fight response, right, and you're primal human walking through the savannah, and then a predator jumps up, you need to be certain. You need to have conviction. You need to respond in a very, you can't waffle around and go, oh, gosh, or you're going to get eaten. And so that's how anger plays out in us. So when people say, well, what do I do? I mean, it's like they want the magic pill. Give me the technique that when I'm in a rage, it's just going to dissolve it and make it go away. And the answer is, well, not much, actually. What you can do is create distance. Mm-hmm. You and the object of your anger, so you're not creating harm. And then you can sort of try to bring some kind curiosity. Okay, what's going on in me? Wow, my body's really going. My thought, look, I'm going over and over it again, and I'm thinking of fantasizing aggressively about what I might do. And I find that if I give that some space, and instead of trying to force anything to happen, to just go, okay, well, this is where I'm at right now. I think one of the most powerful questions we can ever ask is, given this, what would be helpful? So this is, I think, CFT and acceptance commitment therapy are such a fit, because although I shared with you, I know almost nothing about ACT. If you think about it, okay, acceptance and commitment. Given this, I'm accepting what is, what would be helpful? How do I do something, in the direction of where my values are? So
I want to go back to the three parts in the model, but I want to do that later, because what I was thinking now is the thing that I struggle probably the most with is two things. I want to control the other person for never ever hurting me again. And at the same time, I feel guilty, and I feel like, what a human am I that I can be so angry? And those two are so intertwined that I hardly ever know what to do. And I've learned that if it's so sharp or so intense, that I might just let it rest and see if the peak is over. And if that's over, then probably I can think better on what to do. But those are very intense things to be dealing with in that moment.
They really are.
Yeah.
They really are. And I think that's where self-compassion comes in. To just sort of recognize that, right now, I'm not at my best. I am caught up in this, and it's just rolling. And, maybe I can find, I will find a way to work with it. Maybe I'll find a really effective way to work with it, or maybe I'll stumble along for a while. But if I give myself some space, I can at least not make it worse.
Exactly.
While I give myself some room to work, But I think, for many of us, there's this voice that comes in that says, well, it's not okay that you're like this.
Yeah.
You sort of shouldn't be like this. And this means this or that bad thing about you. And that's just silly. I mean, anger is a normal human emotion. When it takes us over in the way we're describing, it's doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Mm-hmm. Right. And the problem is that just isn't a very good fit with the way humans live in the world right now. So if we can just kind of recognize that this is genuinely tricky, this is like genuinely difficult, and then to say, okay, well, given that, what would be helpful? Mm-hmm. Meet this with in this moment, and maybe I can figure out what to do about the situation a little later. I find when I'm working with people who struggle with anger, there's a sort of a rhythm to working with anger. And the first part of it is, okay, I recognize I'm really angry. Mm-hmm. You sort of pull back and say, okay, I'm going to work with me. And then I'm going to, once I've kind of got that balanced a little bit, then I'll work with the thing, whatever, the person or the situation is. But that's very tricky too. And the reason it's tricky is that one of the things that our anger carries with it, it's just a part of anger. It has nothing to do with the situation, is a felt experience of urgency.
Yeah.
When we're angry, even if we sort of cognitively know, I'm not going to do anything that's going to be helpful here.
You need to act upon.
Let's do something now. And that's just a property of the anger. Yeah. So we could just notice, I really want to send that email. And if I do, it's not going to be good. So I'm going to go ahead and hold off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and it's. I was thinking it's not just guilt; it's also shame that I can be that angry. It says something about me that I can be that angry. But yeah, it's a human.
And the real interesting thing when you start playing around with compassion and culture and all this stuff is when you start asking yourself questions like, "Well, where did you get the idea that it's not okay for you to be that angry?"
Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, how did you figure that out? And is that even true?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think it's true. I think you get as angry as you want. You got to figure out how to do it, right?
It's not towards you, maybe, but
well, you just let me have it. But how angry you get is how angry you get, and that's what you get to work with. I mean, it's not like anyone is choosing to feel anger.
Yeah.
Who goes, that situation, okay, I'm going to get really mad about that now. It just rises up in us. And, how quickly that happens and how strongly that happens, that varies from person to person based on a lot of stuff that we don't have any choice about and we don't have much control over. But once it happens, we can figure out ways to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just to give you an example from my own story, if you see my TEDx, that the whole thing that led me to CFT was struggling with my own anger and not wanting to model that for my son and to pass that on. And the shame you're talking about, it's very real for me, But once I sort of started looking at the anger through a compassionate lens and started paying attention to it, I figured some things out. And, one of the things that I figured out, and this is just in the last couple of years, I mean, this is long since I wrote the anger book, is that my anger actually is related, I think, to ADHD. I was looking through a checklist and I'm like, I have ADHD. When I look at those symptoms, like ding, 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 I'm checking them all off. And, I've developed a lot of, over the years, these compensatory strategies for dealing with it. So I never struggled in a way that caused anyone to look at me or me to look at myself academically, to say, oh, that's ADHD. The way my ADHD plays out is impulsivity. I'm very impulsive, and so when you combine that with some irritability in terms of temperament, you don't look ADHD. You just look like a jerk.
Oh.
And for years, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm a jerk. I have this, I've just got to work with that, and I started out with this, how do I compassionately work with this fact that, my baseline setting is not really being very much of a nice guy. And what's interesting is that actually isn't true at all. And strange thing is that the way I figured out is, a couple years ago, I decided, I'm getting close to 50. I want to get in shape. So I'd always exercised on and off a little bit, but I started working out like really consistently in the morning. So these days during the week, I give myself the weekends off sometimes, but during the week, if almost every day I'm working out hard for 30 or 45 minutes in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm either running or doing like high intensity interval training or something like that. And I started out to try to just get in shape. But the problem is now I can never stop. And it kind of pisses me off, actually, because I'm not one of these people who loves to exercise. I'm a very lazy guy. But what I've observed, and this relates to the ADHD, there's data on this for ADHD. On the days I work out hard in the morning, and sadly, it can't be like yoga unless it's really intense yoga. Some yoga is really intense.
Yeah.
Not the stretchy meditative yoga that I prefer. That doesn't do it. It has to be something that's intense.
Yeah.
I do that for 30 to 45 minutes in the morning, then I'm just remarkably emotionally stable throughout the day.
Yeah.
And on the days where I'm all over the place and I'm really struggling, without fail, that's a day that I didn't work out.
Yeah.
And often it's a day that I didn't necessarily sleep so well the night before too. And so I've sort of put all this together. It's like, oh, I'm not a jerk. I've got ADHD. And I can treat that with exercise. And it really helps. And so, sorry for the monologue about me here, but the whole idea is when we bring kind curiosity to it and stop judging ourselves and saying, this is something that's bad about me, and just sort of paying attention. Stuff ebbs and flows within us. Sometimes we can learn some things that are really helpful, because I almost never get really angry these days. And the reason is I'm either exercising, or if I don't, I can go, okay, I didn't do my workout today, so I need to be a little more careful in terms of monitoring my mood, because it's likely I'm going to be a little more reactive.
Yeah.
It's so really, when
that's very the thing that strikes me is I'm not really a jerk. I mean, I don't know you that well, but I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Jerk? That's really amazing how that works, and so painful to, and I mean, you're just like me, we're trained to be curious, and we're trained to look at our problems and our issues. Not always, we can't always do it, but we're trained to look at them with curiosity. So there's just no way, if there is ADHD or autism or ADD or whatever that our brains can have as an issue or a challenge, that this relates to your self-image at a certain point, and how that starts off making all kinds of convictions and reasoning for why things are the way they are. And so I'm not a big fan of diagnoses, but this is just very good to know. And at the same time, very good to be acting also curious in, and so what can I do to help myself deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. And luckily, by the time I figured that out about myself, I'd been, teaching and writing and practicing compassion
for
all
a long time.
Years.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of interesting, because when I finally realized, oh, that's it, I've got ADHD, there was no shame associated with that. Actually, it was very liberating. It was like, oh, well, that explains a whole lot. Wow, okay. Yeah. It was actually de-shaming in a way, because the stuff that had come from that, I'd sort of, it just accepted as personality defects, or whatever, something that, and I'd accepted those and said, well, this is just the way I am. But I thought I can just accept it, but I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. But once I got a little more understanding, I'm like, oh, I can accept it, and maybe there's some stuff I can do about it.
I was talking to Dr. Graciela Rovner about, wonderful.
She is fantastic.
Yeah, she is. We were talking about the nervous system and the influence it has on pain, and on psychological pain. And one of the things she said was that she does yin yoga in the evening before she goes to bed. And doing that makes her go less into fight, flight, freeze overnight, and therefore waking up completely differently. And then, because basically what you're saying with all the exercising and the intensity of it is you're regulating your nervous system to be more at a safe level and at a calmer level, actually. Yeah,
and I've become, I never thought, because again, I'm not a go exercise kind of guy, but I've become kind of an evangelist for it, because it's been the most powerful thing that I've ever found in terms of helping me work with the stuff I got.
Yeah.
And I guess the message that I would want to put out there for people listening is not go exercise, right? Because that's what works for me. I don't know if that's what works for you.
It's the curiosity of it.
Yeah, it's the curiosity. It's like to shift away from seeing these challenges we have as something that's wrong with me or something to be ashamed of, to just sort of trying to notice what's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
and notice, it took me like 6 months of working out before I realized, on the days I work out, I'm just a lot better version of me.
Yeah.
A long time that, before I would have said, well, I feel better because I worked out like everybody, but it was more than that. And so just that willingness to try and notice what is helpful, helps me be a better version of me, or helps me in whatever I struggle with, and then try to build on that.
Yeah. You said, I don't know, I think it's on the TEDx that you said, I have an irritable temperament. And I thought, like, does that exist? Is it, coming from the Buddhistic or ACT kind of way of looking at things, like we don't really have an I. There is, the I evolves.
Yeah.
And so I thought, like, I've never heard that, and that exists. So what is that have to do with personality and the way we're dealing with things? And so that's the thing. That's what I'm actually.
So you're asking about the I?
I'm asking, is it like a true, is there literature on this? Is it, it's the first time that I've ever heard it. I have an irritable temperament and that exists.
I would be tempted to respond to that by saying that I have an irritable temperament, and I don't know it's the case that either I or temperament exists. If you really talk about what it means to exist, I don't think there's an I. The ACT folks and the Buddhists and CFT, I think, falls right in there in terms. If you ask folks in CFT, like, what is the self?
Yeah.
Right. There's not a lot of writing on this that I'm aware of. Paul Gilbert's written a lot, and I haven't read all of it. So he may have spoken directly to this, something I haven't come across. But, CFT, when you talk about the self, we're much more likely to talk about, like, functional versions of the self in any moment.
Can you explain what that means?
The idea that basic motives and the emotions that evolve to serve them tend to organize our minds and bodies and specifically the way they work in certain ways. So we're talking about anger. We know that when anger comes up, the attention tends to narrow onto the source of threat. Our thinking becomes more narrowed on the threat, but also more rigid, less flexible, more certain. We have a felt experience of urgency. I was talking before. Our mental imagery becomes ruminative. So all of that kind of stuff. And so the idea is that, in a very functional way, we could talk about how we all have sort of infinite versions of the self that correspond to how we're organized in any given moment by these basic motives and emotion. So if you think about times when you're angry, the way you feel, the way you engage with people and all of that stuff is probably very different from when you feel affectionate or feel, caring, or when you feel competitive, or et cetera, et cetera. But that's not to say, but those are really only descriptive of how the self how you're showing up in any given moment. It's not like saying there is this solid thing there.
Yeah, there isn't I am this or that. No, I'm just responding to.
So a lot of that is verbal shorthand. When I say I have an irritable temperament, what I'm really doing is cheating a bit for the TEDx audience, saying my experience is that irritability tends to arise in me fairly frequently and powerfully relative to what appears to be lots of other people's experience.
Yeah.
So I don't think so through the verbal shorthand, it may sound like we're talking about things as these really solid, like I is a thing and temperament is a thing. And that's not really what I mean about it. It's just a shorthand for describing the experiential sort of quality that I've observed as I've moved through life.
Yeah. Yeah, it struck me because it's not what we believe or what we know to be true. And I felt like, is this something that I need to take into account, that this is the case? But I get what you're saying.
No, it's I don't think there is such a thing like as temperament, right? I mean, but in the psychological nomenclature, the term's been used for years. And whether or not this is a real thing or not is a subject of debate. And I think most of us don't get too attached to it. But I think we can all sort of recognize that for some people, anxiety comes up more frequently than other people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not their fault. And so for me, again, I'm always looking, and I need to be precise with my language, but in terms of who the audience is, if I can give someone a really sort of quick, pithy way to recognize, oh yeah, I'm someone who experiences anxiety fairly frequently, and I didn't choose to be this way, and this isn't my fault, but maybe that's something I need to work with. And you'll see in the TEDx talk, I said that, and then I sort of I tried to unpack what I meant a little bit because I anticipated these questions. but I also, it felt worth it to me because I wanted to give people a way to go, oh yeah, that's what, oh yeah, okay. So, because if you can go, oh yeah, I get anxious a lot and I didn't choose that and that's not my fault. It's just sort of how things work for me. I can have compassion for that. I can go, oh, and that's really hard. What would help for that?
Yeah.
Versus someone who says, I'm a scared person. Or I'm, whatever, I'm weak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And feels ashamed about that. So
yeah, you can't work with that. It's a static kind of a situation. This is who I am, and that's what I'm going to have to deal with the rest of my life, where we're talking about how can I move in a situation and not accept this is who I am. Yeah.
I think one of the really tricky things for behavioral scientists is to find ways to balance precision of language and pragmatic helpfulness in terms of translating the things we study.
Absolutely.
Things that can be really helpful for your average person walking down the street. And I think, none of us is perfect at doing that. But I think it's just tricky, right? It's just sort of hard to do.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's true.
Yeah. So you do the best you can.
Yeah. we do. We try. I was just confused and I thought I have to ask you this one.
That's a great question. And I'm so glad you asked it because I know behind you are 20,000 contextual behavioralists who heard that line and were like, oh, what the heck's Russell talking about? But the funny thing is I totally agree with everything they would say about that.
Exactly. Exactly. I was thinking, is there like an exercise or some advice that we could hand to people who feel that they have an irritable temperament or that get overwhelmed by rage or anger? What can they do? Well,
I think the most helpful, there are lots of practices and exercises and things like this. But as you know, when we're really caught up, it's very hard to think clearly or to engage in exercises that are designed to calm yourself down, or even to want to do that, right? Because we're angry. We don't. Not only do we have a hard time, but we don't want to. It's like I'm kind of, I'm here and I'm enjoying it a little bit, maybe. So, for me, I've been talking a lot lately about boiling compassion down into two questions that you could even put on a card and stick in your purse or your wallet or whatever. And when you notice whatever it is that you're struggling with, maybe it's anger, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's whatever, right? The first question is just to notice. So if the person can notice they're angry, actually, I've got another practice beyond this that can help with this. The first thing is once you notice you're angry or you're struggling, to just ask yourself, okay, given what I know about me, and that could be, your history and how you were raised and what you learned and what you didn't learn and, all the things that happen, normal stuff, traumatic stuff, whatever, all your life experiences, maybe even what you know about your brain and your whatever. Given what I know about me, does it make sense that I would struggle with this right now?
That's a good one.
Right? Does it make sense that I would struggle with exactly this?
Yeah.
Now, our clients don't always answer it this way, which is, when they don't, it's good because it gives us an awareness of some of the obstacles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the answer to that question is always yes, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I know it's always yes is that by definition, our struggles occur within contexts in which they make sense.
Yeah.
That's why I struggle with some things that you don't struggle with. And you struggle with things that Gabriella doesn't struggle with. And I don't know that Gracie struggles with anything, but but you get my point, right? So so the idea is, if you ask yourself that question, and you can find your way to yeah, it makes sense that I'd be really angry about this. I care about this. Mm-hmm. And just acknowledging that, it starts to bring something else up. Mm-hmm. Change the anger, but maybe connect you with something else. Maybe the value behind the anger, or whatever it is, or maybe it softens if there's behind the anger is self-criticism or self-attack, maybe it softens some of that. To just acknowledge, it makes sense that I would struggle with this. So that's the first question. And the second question is, given that I am struggling with this, and it makes sense that I'm struggling with this, given this, what would be helpful? And sometimes people have the misconception that when you ask what would be helpful, that means what would help me fix the problem. Mm-hmm. And of course, if that's an option, of course we should do that, right? If we can, exactly. There's something I could do to fix this, then go ahead and do it. But, most of us sort of recognize, I think, that so often the things that really get us angry or really get us scared or really just whatever it is are stuff that we can't immediately affect and change. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's the kind of things that really cause threat in humans, things that are unpredictable and uncontrollable. Yeah. Right? That tends to get us bent out of shape. So if we can sort of, in that situation, the answer to the question, what would be helpful, very often is, what would help me be the best version of me while I deal with this really difficult situation? What would help me be as comfortable as possible while I go through this inherently difficult experience? Mm-hmm. And I think there's tremendous power in that. I think we serve our clients and ourselves and everybody, I think, a lot better, rather than just handing people techniques and say, here, do this, here, do this, here, do this. This will work. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But if we can help people learn to ask themselves that question, to pause for a moment and stop blaming and attacking or raging or avoiding or, whatever they do, and just to go, oh yeah, this is really hard. Given what I know from my life experience and me, what seems like it would be helpful here? And when people start asking themselves that question, good things tend to happen. Yeah. And I think the power in that is twofold. I think part of the power is it's hard to find what's helpful if you're not looking for it. Yeah. Asking the question, you're maybe going to find something that would be helpful. But the other thing, and this is a very CFT, this is a fundamental point in compassion-focused therapy. When we ask that question, what would be helpful, we're connecting, we're engaging with that caregiving motive. Yeah. We're shifting, and perspective is too small a word for it. Yeah. We're shifting our social mentality. We're shifting so that instead of the angry version of Russell approaching the situation, the version of Russell that wants to help, the compassionate Russell, is approaching the situation, or approaching the angry version of me. And instead of saying, you shouldn't be like this, it's saying, yeah, actually, it makes a lot of sense you'd be like this. And maybe there's something we could do here that would help.
I think it's really, as I said in the beginning, I don't know as much of compassion-focused therapy as I do now, an hour later.
Good.
Yeah, really, really. But it's really deeply embedded in like a starting point of acceptance, and then going to how can I find a loving way of dealing with this, starting from an acceptance point.
It has to be. And that's one of the fundamental messages of compassion-focused therapy and compassion is that, you know, and this isn't ours, right? We inherited this from Buddhism. Mm-hmm. Recognition that life involves suffering.
Yeah.
To accept that, and then to be sort of vigilant to notice it in a real kindly, curious, sort of non-judgmental way when it shows up. You know, yeah, this is really hard.
Yeah. Is there, like, I think we had a nice conversation. I think it was very.
I do too. This is wonderful. We should talk more often. I like you.
Thanks. I like you too. I was thinking, is there, like, if given the conversation that we had, would there be any wise words, advice that you would like to give people?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide how, like, time bound I want this to be. I don't think, you know, because we're in the middle of this pandemic, I've been having conversations a lot lately with students, clients, and friends, and colleagues, and all kinds of people. And there's so many of us that are just really struggling, that are really having a hard time.
Yeah.
Right now. And, you know, I've been kind of trying to remind people, you know, we're living through a global pandemic right now. It's not just that things suck right now. It's like they suck in a historic, they'll be about this in 100 years sort of way.
True.
It's actually objectively really tough to be a human being in the world right now. You know, one thing we haven't talked about is, you know, humans really evolved, and there's lots of science on this. It's really wonderful to learn about. We evolved to co-regulate emotions with one another. Mm-hmm. You know, we didn't evolve to do that in isolation. We evolved to feel safe through connection with people who care about us and like us, and, you know, we can care for, and vice versa. That's really how we are designed to feel safe and okay. And so, you know, what this virus has done really is it's ratcheted up a lot of the things that create threat in humans. Mm-hmm. Controllability, unpredictability, you know, rapidly changing situations. Even the information we get from authorities is changing as they learn more and it's not their fault, right? They're doing the best they can, but, you know, it changes and changes. But this is almost, this version of reality is almost designed to create distress in human beings. Yeah. We're simultaneously faced with this situation where the normal stuff we would do to help ourselves feel safe, a lot of that evolution designed for us to do to help ourselves feel safe has been cut off from us. Mm-hmm. Being able to just go out and have fun with friends.
Very true.
Being able to do these things. And so I guess what I would want people to know is that, you know, if you're struggling, it makes sense that you're struggling, right? This is genuinely difficult. And to sort of ask the question, given that, what would be helpful? Mm-hmm. What can I do within these sort of, what degrees of freedom do I have to try and you know, make life a little safer, a little more comfortable, to help the best version of me sort of show up, you know, and to use what you know about yourself to do that. And so I've created all these little rituals. I told you about my workouts, but I also have these little fake candles, right? They're not real candles, but they've got a little moving wick. So unless you look right at them, they look like a candle out the corner of your eye, right? Because I can't have real candles in my office, or, you know, there are building codes and stuff against that. And every 10 a.m., every day at 10 a.m., my parents for the holiday gave me a gift. They gave me this box of these British butter biscuits. They're these buttery shortbread cookies. I love them. They're so good. But I you can't eat them all the time. I have one a day. At 10 a.m. every day, I have a break in my work and I go upstairs because I'm in my basement working like all of us. And I fill up my coffee and I get my little butter cookie. I have like 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just a cookie. I look forward to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's this moment of, and so I build in these little rituals that help me connect with something that's really, that's comforting or soothing or I've been snuggling with my dogs a lot the last year, and it's been so helpful. They're going to lose their minds when we go back to work because they're so spoiled now. But so the whole idea is that we can, I guess what I would encourage people to do is to invite themselves to really consider, to look and build a repertoire, to catalog the things that they notice are helpful for them and helping them feel safe and soothed and to be the best version of them, and to intentionally build those experiences into their lives. Not when things are really hard, but all the time, particularly when things are really hard. And if we do it when things aren't really hard, then those behaviors will be there for us. Force of habit, because when things get really hard, it's very hard to be creative in that way. So I don't know if that's wisdom or not, but that's what I got.
No, I was thinking, even if you would level it up, it would be nice to have a conversation with others of the list that they would make to see what comforts them, and then to get ideas from other people to see what helps them. I think that's very important to do. Yeah, absolutely.
I started thinking about this a number of years ago. There was a number of years ago, and I had visited Denmark, and right about that time, there was about 6 months where everyone in the world was talking about hygge, right? There were all these books coming out about hygge. And I love that, because hygge, for those who know, is the sort of this cultural aspect of Danish culture, where there's a real emphasis on creating cozy connections between people that feel really safe and comfortable. And I think, quite frankly, that's why the people in Denmark are so generally relatively happy, even though the weather there is so miserable for so much of the year. They've sort of figured out how to do this. And so when I visited, just paying attention to that and thinking, gosh, that's a really intentional way of saying, how do we create these contexts for connection and safeness? True. And it really got me thinking about that. And so I think you're right, exchanging ideas with one another and having that a conversation that we have. Rather than, glorifying the 80-hour work week. What do you do that helps you, when you're playing, or what do you really enjoy? What helps you feel safe?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one to round up our conversation. I think it's a good one for people to take home. Yes.
Good. Thank you again for having me. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, well, it's really been enriching for me to have this conversation. So thank you myself as well to you to make the time for it.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime. It's a great pleasure to see you.
I really hope we'll see each other at a conference, which I think sadly will be online again next year. But eventually we will meet each other again live, probably. How can people reach you if they want to reach out to you?
I'm pretty easy to find because I've got kind of a weird name.
Yeah.
If you Google me, you only really get me, which is good or bad, depending on how well behaved I am. But people can reach out to me through my website. My email address is quite literally russellkolts@hotmail.com. And I have had that since the 1990s. So, and I'm also pretty easy to find at the university. So
yes. Okay.
Those all work.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Be well.
You too. Bye-bye.